Hello, everybody. Hi. Thanks for coming out. We really appreciate you coming to Flyleaf today and supporting your local independent bookstore. And I'm going to turn this over to Belle for the proper introduction, but just remember you can grab a copy of the book up front if you want to.
Great. Hi. Hi. It's my great honor. This is the introduction I was meaning to give a couple of weeks ago at NC State when I had COVID. So I told Wilton and Jill that I wanted to come to Flyleaf, and I would have been here anyway, but I wouldn't have been saying the same words that I was planning to say at NC State. Anyway, my name is Belle Boggs. It's my great honor to introduce my friend and colleague Wilton Barnhardt, who will read tonight from his hilarious and also quite serious romp of a novel, Western Alliances. I first heard Wilton read from this book, the finished version of this book, last month at McIntyre's, and I've been determined to follow him around, listening to him like a groupie at all of his events. Turns out I had COVID when he read at NC State, so I'm sharing a little bit about Wilton and why we all might do well to follow him here at Flyleaf, my other favorite bookstore. I've actually been following Wilton for most of my professional life. At first it was unwitting. I went to UC Irvine as a graduate student the year after Wilton was there as a visiting writer. This was just after Show World came out, and I can tell you that my own visiting teachers were not nearly as warm, funny, or exacting as Wilton. One of them, Robert Olmsted, tried to buy a story idea from me for $20 because he was sure I couldn't execute it. Wilton would have had the decency just to steal it. And he also would not have tried to take me home. After that, I moved to Brooklyn, where I lived 1 block away from where Wilton once lived, on Freeman Street, in the treeless, smelly, very unhip ass end of Greenpoint. Wilton lived on Green Street. These were his Emma Who Saved My Life days, about a decade, something like that, more before, and was also a keyboardist on a Swans album while he lived there, which I listened to in college when I was depressed. And that was right around the time of gospel. And finally, many years later, right after the best-selling Look Away, I followed Wilton into Tompkins Hall at NC State, one of the best things to ever happen to me. I was just talking this morning to a new graduate student who went out with Wilton and others after his NC State reading, and she gushed, "He knows so much, he's been everywhere." To follow Wilton, indeed, is to follow someone who has been just about everywhere. And if he hasn't been there, he's read about it or thought about it, or is planning to take a boat or a train to see it next week. Wilton is a man who's driven to Alaska from here in North Carolina. He doesn't fly, which seems exceedingly sensible these days. He knows all the best hole-in-the-wall and also quite fancy restaurants. He makes all his own cocktail mixes. He's read absolutely everything. Do you like talking politics? Wilton knows just as much as the most ardent political junkie, but he will also help you leave the conversation feeling somehow slightly less stressed about our beleaguered state of North Carolina. To follow Wilton is to read and reread 19th century novels, but also to know everything about contemporary poetry, to see the wisdom as well as the folly of youth. It's to see deeply into characters and into the alliances that make and unmake us as families, as regions, as countries, as societies. So pleased to welcome my friend, Wilton Barnhardt.
Well, that was a fabulous introduction. I didn't know that you were right behind me so many times. I would have left something for you. Left some cookies out.
It's a good Swans album.
Well, the Swans album. Yeah, and that you listened to that when you were to make you less depressed. So it was Western Alliances is it's a very simple premise. The year is 2008, and Roberto Costa, Portuguese-American fellow from Providence, Rhode Island, he and his sister have been living in Europe and enjoying themselves and getting degrees they don't need and bumming around and backpacking in hostels. And they thought this would be their life always because their father, Salvador Costa, had become head of bonds at a little investment brokerage house called Hightower Wiggins. But as I said, it's 2008. And they're all one by one going bust. Bear Stearns has gone down, Lehman Brothers has gone down, and now their father's company might go down, but it doesn't sink in for a long time. But the SEC has frozen the accounts of Hightower Wiggins, so their ATM doesn't work and their credit card doesn't work. So they've gone into sort of mooch mode. They've looked up old boyfriends, girlfriends, anything to stay in Europe and not go home. And the thought, somewhere around page 300, starts occurring to them, we're probably going to have to go home, and we're probably going to have to get a job, which is the thing most to be avoided. So I thought, I'm going to read something I haven't read yet. The first place he goes to mooch is this house in the south of France, owned by Clémentine Dix. The husband's passed away, and he went out with Hélène Dix, the daughter, and she and her boyfriend and him mooching, sort of along for the ride, or going down with an ancient aunt and this man no one likes, to share a house in the south of France. This is not an autobiographical book, but I have been in the south of France with a family that does not particularly care for each other's company. And, anyway, I think you'll get the idea. So to get it straight, Marcel is the boyfriend. Hélène is his ex-girlfriend, she's going to dump Marcel. And maybe you wonder, is she going to get back with Roberto? And Clémentine is the mom, and I think that's all you need to know. The threesome stopped at the Carrefour for some staples: milk, eggs, some almost acceptable baguettes, since the boulangerie they liked in the tiny town was not open past 2 p.m., and the sun was in the last hour. Marcel, Hélène, and Roberto also conspired to have a secret stash of cookies, candy, alcohol that would remain in the trunk of the car, and selfishly not shared with the hefty great aunt, who would offer their precious treats to her intolerable old acquaintances when they came to call, not shared with Monsieur Haquin, who would spend a day circling around the kitchen like a hawk, riding the thermals, picking and fingering and nibbling and depleting the supplies of anything tasty. "I can't believe," Roberto said, depositing an overpriced package of American Oreos into the shopping cart, "that Monsieur Haquin is still, 1, alive, and 2, invited. It has been 5 years since we were all at Mastis together, and I sensed even then he was universally detested." Their supermarket detour allowed a full unpacking of their detestation of Monsieur Haquin. The three of them eager to land the vilest description. His skin was sallow to a remarkable degree. Deep trenches of purple under his sad eyes, skin the color of bruise around armpits and groin, and invariably, day after day, his Speedo, which gave decolletage to the ass crack and back, and tormented anterior observers with an unseemly bulge that threatened as he craned this way for the drink just out of reach. As he lumbered in and out of his chaise longue, the blue chaise was ceded to him, to expose itself, or at minimum, the pubis. Every time Roberto looked at him, there was a suspicion of an erection as he lay oiled and engreased by the pool, inert, a human sloth limp and slumped on his branch, staring at everyone with disapproval or furtive lusts. "You have no knowledge of similar protocol in French country houses," said Hélène. "I have spoken to my mother about getting rid of him. We both find his conservative politics odious, but my late father, a century ago, invited him." Marcel shrugged. "Oh, yes, Roberto once invited. It is for life. It will be a social breach to not invite. All strategies to sneak down to Provence without him. were useless because Maurice Haquin's Paris acquaintances formed a virtual tracking system of Clémentine progress south. It was likely what he lived for, Hélène informed Roberto. This was his greatest social triumph. I'm sure he is in love with my mother, Hélène declared. Probably lives for this summer show of breasts during the sunbathing matinee. Marcel, yes, he retreats to his room to touch himself, to touch that monstrous, oozing slug between his legs. Thank you for that, Roberto said in French. I'm thoroughly revolted now. There's no need for the light dinner we were planning. The Dices advertised Couge-le-Pin as their summer residence, but the actual house was up in the dry, aromatic hills to the north and closer to the village of Lauberdac. A deader southern settlement could not be discovered in France. No one ever thought of heading into Lauberdac for shopping, since it seemed to be inhabited by villagers who made it a point of honor to go bankrupt, for their stores were never open, and to roast alive in their houses, since the windows and shutters remained tightly closed. From this ghost town began a 12-kilometer winding ascent upon the chalk white roads known to the Bouches-du-Rhône high country, switchbacks so severe, a lane so narrow, lurches so nauseating that it ensured once you were in situ at Mastis, you would only begrudgingly leave it. The driver had better have a good memory too, since no amount of practice could build confidence with the 4 identical intersections. Directions were always kept in the glove compartment. Rarely was an ascent from Couge accomplished without having to reverse for a missed turn. At Masdis, there was one large dining room, living room, kitchen, with the designated living room half defined by a weather-racked chair and a dried-out leather couch with a kaleem thrown over it. The other ground floor room was a bedroom that remained in crepuscular gloom on the north side of the house. Not able to mount the stairs for an upstairs bedroom, Clémentine Dice's 87-year-old Aunt Sidonie had annexed the only truly private bedroom in the whole house. Aunt Sidonie eschewed the sun, never took meals with the rest of the group, nor was there any insistence that she do, just puttered and moped around the ground floor continually, left dishes in the sink for others to wash. She invited an also loathed set of visitors, old ladies from the town who paid her court, a former house servant, the neighboring farmer and his wife, retired, but they looked after Mastis when no one was around and kept the place from becoming a shambles, and 2 or 3 indistinguishable spinsters who spoke of old times when all sorts of people were alive who now were not alive. Maman, s'il vous plaît, Hélène said before switching to English so Aunt Sidonie would not comprehend. The spectacle of sitting with my grandfather's gardener and that horrible fat cleaning lady like they are intimates. Then there was that classic French shudder, no doubt learned in the crib. Oh, how can you bear it? I like to hear them reminisce about my mother, Madame D said evenly, who barely troubled herself to know me. The rest of the visitors were assigned one of 4 bedrooms upstairs. Roberto's was the most rustic. A mattress on the wooden floor, the cast-off junk of the house instead of furniture, a child's floating toy for the pool, a bicycle missing a wheel, winter blankets. He was 5 inches longer than the mattress provided, but Roberto reminded himself, free accommodation. There was the pool, which all stoically assumed had never once been cleaned. Leaves and needles, dried brown petals, a yellowy film of pine pollen floated upon the surface. I am scared of it, Hélène confided in French. They will have to remove my gangrenous vagina if I see him swim in it. For once, Roberto thought the French didn't pretty up the grotesque. Vulve gangreneuse. Good name for a punk band. Be not afraid, Marcel declared moments before peeling off his jeans and revealing heart-covered boxer shorts, taking a flying leap into the murky waters. Oh, cold, cold, he proclaimed, bobbing quickly to the top. There were 3 pool seating possibilities. The blue chaise, tainted by the suppurations of Monsieur Haquin. A second chaise was that of Las Dices by seniority, La Dices by seniority, and a sun-cracked plastic chair that, for all its ugliness, was much contested. Madame Dice moved her chaise away from the pool, dragged it with a scrape over the concrete to the grass away from the shade of the trees. This was her sunning station. That first morning, Roberto observed Madame Dice was walking around the kitchen, singing to herself, wearing a loose chemise attached by a single button. The strictures of Paris were behind them. It was the South. It was summer. One declaration followed another. She would have everything tout liberal, tout ouvert, tout nu. She chided the others, encased, imprisoned in their clothes, as she stepped gingerly over the spiky grass to reach her chaise. Roberto's hostess, her back to the house, removed her chemise for the ritual sunbathing. Roberto discreetly turned to see if Maurice Haquin was fixed on Madame Dice, only to see that he was preoccupied with his pâté and toasts on a paper plate. How he brought each morsel to his mouth as a cephalopod, a tentacle furling and unfurling. Madame Dice bathed in the southern sun, her arms fixed on the arms of the chaise, eyes closed like a statue of Anubis. You could hear everything in Mastis. The old plaster walls served somehow as amplifiers for whatever was afoot. The ritual honking of sinus clearing from Monsieur Haquin at bedtime, the tinkle of bottles upon Madame Dice's toilette table, the creak of the bed with Marcel and Helene, the tuba-like passing of gas of Helene's great aunt. There's no intimate love in this house, Helene mumbled to Roberto at breakfast, having made a face at the taste of the coffee that Aunt Sidonie had made. But I recall you and I doing it when I was here 5 years ago. Oh, apparently every movement was heard and discussed. Roberto poured himself a cup. God, no wonder your aunt stares at me like I'm a fiend. He sipped, and she's trying to avenge herself by poisoning us with this coffee. Oh, she's so senile. Hélène whispered, she probably put potting soil in the cafetiere piston. After some indistinguishable sun-baked days, it clouded up. That was the cue for a round of necessary visits. Madame Dice would go see her 85-year-old father in a nursing facility in Aix-en-Provence, and they would take his sister, Aunt Sidonie. It finally became clear that Monsieur Haquin had a use. After lunch, he would bring his sputtering Renault around to the side door of the house and load Aunt Sidonie into the front seat while Madame Dice took the back. Monsieur Haquin was the uncomplaining chauffeur for the long and winding progress to Aix. What could have been a 3-hour trip often stretched to 5 or 6, and the sputtering Renault returned around sunset, everyone clutching shopping bags from fashionable Aix, a trunk full of groceries, delicacies unknown to the Carrefour in Pau-Japin, a new scarf for Madame Dice, which she would model as an exhausted Aunt Sidonie moaningly staggered to her cave without dinner. Madame's departure was the only time Marcel and Helene could make love without an audience, so they begged pardon, taking their leave of Roberto, who stayed with his book by the pool. Of course, true to the house, every squeal and laugh and grunt was audible, broadcast to the poolside. Auditory engineers who design concert halls should study Mastis's construction to replicate such oral fidelity. It is not long before everybody is sleeping with everyone. It starts off innocently, and then they decide they're going to go through every position of the Kama Sutra, and they beg mom to go visit her father again. And her father, by the way, is being questioned by a Human Rights Commission about what he did in the war in Provence. And everywhere in the book, there's always a little thread that if you pull goes to something really ugly because it's Europe. Now, I thought we would read, I really hesitate to read anything from Eastern or Central Europe, I should say, with John Balaban, learned master of languages here. I'm going to mispronounce everything, but he'll have to forgive me. This is a road trip with people who shouldn't be on a road trip together, which if you've been to Europe and you are young and you meet people in cafes, one thing leads to another, and then you're getting a ride to somewhere, and they all decided they'd go to Greece. And these 5 people really shouldn't be in the same car. You might think, well, I don't know these characters. You don't have to know the characters because Roberto doesn't know who these people are. There is Lucrezia, who is a one-time supermodel, a little past her prime. She's still quite beautiful, but she was such a badly behaved model that her career declined. And she's got this idea that she'll have a picture of herself taken with a cat in every country in Europe, and that it's going to be a coffee table book called International Cat. It's a horrible idea. Might sell more than this, but I better watch what I say. Her husband is Ludovico Marchesini. He's an architect, but seems strangely devoid of any actual architecture that he has designed. And their friend Mira from Holland, who no one can figure out what she's doing in the trip and how anyone knows anybody. And she's got this broken down Golf. And so 3 of them will go in that, and 2 of them will go in Ludo's Audi Roadster that only has 2 seats. So the 5 of them are heading out into the Balkans. And the first stop is Hrastovia, which has a very famous, in Slovenia, which has a very famous danse macabre, or plezno grajno. It's a dance of death where the skeletons lead the popes and the kings and the villagers and everybody to the grave, because that's where it's all headed. It's a kind of a very popular wall art, broke out after the plagues in the 1300s. Okay, so the group was the only customers of this family restaurant. The tall, good-looking son, Jean, introduced himself. First, there was wine soup with some meat stock, garlic, onion, and shallot. All you could taste was the musk of the red wine. Claudia said it was like vinegar, but she continued to eat it. Lucrezia said that she did have breakfast, which is her excuse for habitual self-starving, but she tried a spoonful of the wine soup from the others. 2 pans of bread were brought out, and the bread had crackling bits in it, and rather than butter, meat grease was brought to the table in a tub. Roberto thought one nice thing about sampling restaurants with his European rather than American friends was that no one in the party would dream of going, ew, or turning up their nose at animal parts, awful organ meats, which was good, because in addition to the vast plate of carniolan sausages, was the preska tunka, minced bacon with lard and garlic. And that came with the butarepa, the blood sausages, stewed in a crock with turnips. Ludo had ordered a Slovenian Malvasia, one of the famous orange wines of the Julian Alps, and the ones that looked like orange Kool-Aid and tasted like the inside of a clay pot. Of course, I prefer the orange wines of Friuli, Ludo said patriotically, before savoring the glass of minerals perfect for cutting through the lards and fats and suets and congealments. Mira and Lucrezia turned up their noses and decided to order something else. Maybe a local drink of some kind? John, the waiter, said they had fruit drinks. Then he brought them some, then more. The count of fruity concoctions was lost track of. No one needed one more thing to drink or eat, but the elderly mother emerged from the kitchen to see if her work was satisfactory, and the table heaped praise upon her. And this resulted in her directing Jean to put his tallness to use and take down a brown bottle, blow off the dust, and pour shots. Ludo and Roberto glanced at each other. Maybe they should pass, but it was obviously a special bottle that this family-run Gostelina wished to share with their best customers of the autumn, maybe their only customers. So they all threw back a shot of what had to be pure isopropyl ethyl wood alcohol penny thinner. The grandmother had poured herself half a glass too and had the reaction. Jean tried one too. He had the reaction of his guest. The grandmother had no expression at all. Roberto, feeling suddenly gifted in Serbo-Croatian, mangled a compliment to the grandmother. Vrlo dober obled gaspo, gaspar. The grandmother said speaking Italian would be fine. Later, sober, he would realize he did not compliment her meal, but rather complimented her on being washed out and faded, unable to land properly on the word object. In Italian, he questioned the famous Slovenian national soup. How did the wine soup retain the flavor of wine once the alcohol was boiled away? It appeared the alcohol was in no way cooked up. They had consumed several bowls of red wine. The local fruit cordials that Mira and Claudia had had, one after the other, were slivovka, plum spirit, and then Vishnevich cherry spirit. Not really cordials, but 40% liquor. The industrial solvent at the end was Brynjanovich, juniper berry moonshine, all homemade in her bathroom, the grandmother reported, which meant they would be going blind before the evening was out. How to proceed with many of the party too drunk to drive? Well, it was the Mediterranean, you might risk it, but there was a international border with Croatia ahead, and the passed-out passengers would be investigated. The driver would come under suspicion. A drunken plan began to take shape. Ludo would drive his Audi to Poreš, Croatia, an hour away. He would take Mira, the drunkest, in the passenger seat. Given her Dutch drinking skills, she would be the least likely to be sick in his car. That settled, she stumbled to his passenger seat and promptly passed out in the sun. Claudia was sobriety-wise all right to drive, but she couldn't. No license, never learned how. Well, Ludo concluded with a clap on his shoulder, Roberto, you can drive the Golf. I don't drive a stick. This finally got a rise out of the unflappable Ludo. You don't drive a manual. I never learned. We've got automatic cars in America. Lucrezia had consumed hardly any food and had already been sick from her drinking, once subtly at the restaurant bathroom, and then not so subtly against a lovely town symbolic oak in the main square. No one suggested Lucrezia drive or operate any machinery. Maybe Ludo would take Mira and he could come back, but no, he could only drive one of them at a time in the two-seater. They would be at this for hours. Was Rastrovia big enough to have a taxi? No. The only solution was to hire someone local to drive the Golf with Roberto, Lucrezia, and Claudia to Poreš. Roberto concurred, suggesting, and then we'll give him bus fare back to Havrosto, and Ludo broke in. If you, the language master, cannot pronounce this godforsaken place, then do not look to me for help. Jean was quickly petitioned back at the restaurant, but in the intervening time, he'd gotten too drunk, trading shots of his grandmother. Jacob was turned up by Claudia, an old man sitting in front of his shop, half asleep in the heat. He would be happy to drive them, but he did not have a license. No need to have a license for local driving up in these hills, and he could not cross the border. He had no passport. Next was his grandson, Yaka, who looked 14 but assured them if he could drive the tractor on his father's farm, the Golf would prove no difficulty at all. Why don't we simply push the Golf over the edge of that cliff, Ludo mused, looking up at the karst walls that surrounded Rostovia. It will be faster. Lucrezia, staggering, giggling, turned up a man in the only other business of the village. Nick seemed agreeable, but it dawned on everyone that he might be challenged, and spent his days in the watchful eye of his mother, who presided over the coffee shop, the business they had not selected to patronize, although now they repented and ordered strong Slovenian coffees for everyone. The chance to drive the Golf to Poreš now consumed the village, and soon a volunteer came forward, Anshe, prematurely balding 30-something who had tired of watching sports and come from his home, ready to make a little weekend money. He demonstrated complete mastery of the stick shift and a circular demonstration up and down Rostrovia's main village street. The next day, the plan was to take a little boat out to one of the innumerable islets off the coast of Poreš, the Otočići. A boatman would take them out over the choppy harbor waters, into the swells, then pull up against an Otočić, and with the boat pitching and rolling, they would hop out on their own island and their own beach to be picked up again at sunset. A picnic basket would have delicacies, and there would be Prosecco. None of that happened. Everyone lay in bed until noon. If they got up, it was to be sick, or to think better of it and return to bed. The idea of a bumptious boat ride upon the sea proved unpopular. Ludo texted everyone that he had secured a second night at the hotel, even though this wrecked their tight Balkan itinerary. Around noon, Roberto abandoned the possibly dead Claudia in their bed and staggered from the hotel into the white, polished limestone streets of Paris. Each boulevard a solar reflector. It seemed to Roberto the sun itself was making too much noise. Every sound of this Croatian resort made its way to Roberto's headache. The jet skis, the shrieking teenagers in swimwear, the Vespas, the shrill laughing devil children, someone's loud radio blasting Yugo pop. Roberto was at the stage of gastrointestinal delicacy that anything, coffee, water, air, would only make things worse. He saw the steeple for St. Euphemia. He would throw himself on the mercy and natural air conditioning of the old church from the 500s. After his insistence on seeing the church at Rastolia, he knew he would be overruled in his church-mongering from here on out. So he made the pilgrimage privately to sit in the cool, to take in the glimmering mosaics. When he gets back, staggers back to the hotel room, Claudia is awake. And she begins, and we'll leave off in a minute, but she begins, "We have two scenarios," she said, as if it were time for another PowerPoint. "Either Ludo and Mira are having an affair, and Lucrezia does not care or does not know. She is so medicated. Perhaps they make love in the living room while she is sitting like a zombie on the divan and eat her away. She is an empty shell. If she sits too long, have you seen? She nods off. It would be like sleeping with someone's robbed, someone paralyzed. Though for many men, of course, that would be their ideal. Or opzione due, Mira and Lucrezia are the item. Ludo brings Mira along to occupy Lucrezia, who to him is increasingly like a house cat that must be fed and petted from time to time. So you don't think it's a three-way? Oh no, that is the one thing I do not think. Indeed, it is hard to see any of the three sleeping with any other. They're so cold, unromantic. Though I think you are right. Mira, I think, is gay. I like her myself. The square face of the Dutch, the brisk blonde man's cut, the upper arm strength. She does work out. Would you like for me to seduce her so you can have us both? Roberto was not baited into that trap. You are sufficient for my needs. Claudia unzipped her skirt, tossed her headscarf to the chair, lost the blouse, and snuggled in beside him. But there's something between Mira and Ludo. I have seen them argue in a very intimate way. They are conspiring. Yeah, I've seen this too. I asked about his architectural portfolio. It does not seem to exist. Roberto's final supposition on the matter, deeply unsatisfying to Claudia. Maybe our traveling companions are simply friends. What a facile, simplistic American read. Claudia had behaved herself too long. The alpha female had to vent. Mira is quite nice, not my kind of academic. She posits some theory about gender and surgically grafts it to a topic, sensible or not, no data, no empiricism. Sociology, my field, is a loose, baggy discipline, but we do like facts. Research. Of course, I have her email address and number. We will stay acquainted. So, Roberto continued, your worship of the model Lucrezia Pappalardo is at an end. Oh, I still know you want to be with her. I bet you would be adamantino for your Lucrezia, right? And she reached over to his boxer shorts, ready to declare triumph if he was aroused at the mention of Lucrezia, but he was not. She is infantile, nothing more abominable than a woman. What is she now, 30? Acting like a teenager. Oh, it worked for her a generation ago, and she has not changed. But adult man wants to hear that little girl voice. Oh, come, kitty cat, come over here. Think how grotesque that will be when she's 40, 50. I'm surprised Ludo puts up with it. Oh, men can endure any female idiocy if there's some degree of beauty involved. Claudia ranted for a good 10 minutes until she heard herself and felt exposed, her resentment indistinguishable from jealousy. So, how was it when you slept with her? Again, Roberto said, imagine her, imagine me in our early 20s. Well, she must have been thrilled to find you, a rich man, oh, the Sicilian puttana, I bet she can. Yeah. Anyway, I think this ends up in their lovemaking. So anyway, that's what road trips, all people's road trips are like. In all trips to French country houses and Italian villas and all the places that they go. Roberto cannot seem to keep out of everybody's pants, and the men, women as well, and also what also you need to know is he has Marfan syndrome, which is absolutely prevents him from being very functional in bed, and he still scores and gets all these people, but they have to be very creative about how they have sex, and it's sort of like a Kama Sutra, this book. You have all kinds of inventive ways to have sex with people who can't have sex. Anyway, enough of that. I hope that's enough of an advertisement. Tear through the book. Any questions about sex or about Europe?
What is Marfan syndrome?
Marfan syndrome is when you grow too tall too fast. Remember every once in a while a college basketball player, I wonder about Bronny James, LeBron's kid, they have a cardiac arrest, and what happens is their heart can't keep up with the height, and it forms an aneurysm, which can sometimes burst if it's not operated on, but it's most people, they'll have the operation, and it'll be all right, although not necessarily will all the neuropathy in the distant fingers and toes come back. And yeah, he's very tall, very handsome, very rich. He seems on paper, Roberto, to have everything in the world going for him. Just one little thing, that's a problem. Claudia, in her acid way, at some point goes, oh, you're rich, you're good looking, you are endowed, you have everything going for you. You are American foreign policy since the 1960s. You know, when it comes to it, Claudia's maybe the most complicated character. She's messed up too. She's really messed up. And she keeps lying about her own background. She's a very noted academic, though. Imagine someone not entirely sane working in academia.
I mean, so I don't expect a real math answer on this, but like, what part of a book like this is just like your brain working, and what part is based on experience?
Well, I went everywhere that they go in the book. I didn't have the adventures they had, and nor did I have the trust fund that Roberto had for a while. But let's think about it. I was 5 years overseas in school in England, and with lots of summers to explore. And I didn't come home because, again, I don't fly. And then I took 12 years of study abroad students from NC State to various locations around Europe, Prague and Edinburgh and France and wherever. And then, of course, my own trips. So what are we talking, 20 plus summers in Europe, all in that horrible, unair-conditioned continent. I've suffered as few have suffered. I think they're finally realizing they're going to have to spend some money for air conditioning over there. So I felt like I'd not only been everywhere in the book, I've been everywhere several times in the book. So I thought there's 16 countries and about 20 different accents. The woman who read the audiobook has reported. We found someone who had been an accent coach in Hollywood, so they could read. I never thought about the difficulties of reading it aloud, and there are certain accents I would not have any idea how to do, like Dutch. I can hear it, and and others, but I wouldn't know how to do it.
I have a simple follow-up autobiographical question. Have you tried all the food and spirits that you mentioned?
Yes, now that I clearly, from the looks of me, you see there's very few dishes I have ever turned down, or alcohol, so yes, I've tried all those things. I think, that Indiana Jones scene where they're eating monkey brains. So I think the closest Europe gets to that is Spain, oddly enough, in which there's no organ and no degree of rawness that can't, under some festival, be eaten. I remember thinking, oh God, at last, nachos, reaching for these triangles that turned out to be pig's ears, cartilage. And that's not a nacho, is it? Eastern Europe has plenty of gore and awful and blood, but then most countries, European countries, do. We eat all that stuff too. We just grind it up into sausage. So, but you're eating stomach and liver and kidneys and spleens too, if you eat sausage. Well, oh yeah.
Any place during your travels where you thought, oh, this is definitely going into the book?
Oh, I was telling my friend Libby about, we ran into a sheep. It was on the equivalent of the interstate highway, and everyone's flying, 80, 90 miles an hour. We round the corner and there's a flock of sheep in the road, all of them, and the shepherds are waving and saying, slow down, but you can't see it till you turn. And so I dodged the sheep pretty good. I did catch one. And after that, we had the police after us. At some point, they have a misadventure in this book too, and the police are after them. And so that paranoia I use is you don't really want to be known to the authorities in Kosovo, or which is where it was, or Serbia for that matter. These people are, at least in 2008, were just not even 10 years out of brutal exterminations of each other ethnically in the very places that we were. I went to, as they do, I went to this convent, which is Serbian Orthodox, and it's one of the it's not St. Peter's for the Serbians, but it's a major monument to their faith. And it's over the line in Kosovo, and it's guarded by the UN. And there are soldiers all the way around it, and then there's a fence all the way around that with razor wire. And you finally, when you're known tourists, I realized that fairly soon, we were unique in wanting to go see this. And of course, Kosovo is not recognized as a country by a lot of other countries, and it's certainly not recognized as separate from Serbia by Serbia. So you have a makeshift border where a bunch of guys drinking with automatic weapons who probably were doing very bad things 8 years ago would pull us over and ask to see our passport and what were we doing there. The only time and possibly only place in the world where we say we're American and they go, Bill Clinton, And there's a statue to Bill and Hillary in Pristina, the capital, and it's because they intervened and stopped the Serb advance that they were being wiped out by the tens of thousands. And Clinton started bombing with NATO, bombing a bunch of bridges in Vojvodina, I think. Anyway, it's so Bill Clinton, big hero in Kosovo, and Americans welcome. But no, we got into the convent, and the nuns were very adamant that if the guards weren't there, they would be raped and worse, by the locals. And when they went out to do any kind of shopping, they heard about that stuff. So happy parts of Europe.
I wondered, because this is set in 2008, right?
Yeah.
Did it feel as you were working on this that you didn't feel like historical fiction? Did you have to
It did a bit.
divest yourself of the present to work on this?
Right. I mean, they have conversations about how Obama could never win, and, at one point Hicks says, well, thank God, after it's pretty clear Obama wins because it's set through the fall. I said, well, thank God there'll never be a president as embarrassing as George W. Bush again for Americans who go to Europe. And so there's a number of, lines like that. Well, I also think somebody wrote me, just a reader, to just say that there was a melancholy to the book because it was a kind of Europe that they wonder if this will go on. I think about, you remember, go way back to the 80s when I was a student, Europe on $10 a day. You remember Frommer? $10 a day. And if you were a backpacker, $5 hostel, if that. Sometimes it'd be cheaper than that. And you could eat from food trucks. And the food, of course, is amazing. Crepes and, pastries and things. You could have amazing food and not really break that $20 a day. And you're mostly welcome. There was a bit of I was over there when Reagan was president, so there was some anti-Americanism, which seemed deserved. But I wonder if that certain kind of ease and sense of ourselves is all in this boat together as the Western Alliance. I wonder if that's as much the case. At the moment, it's holding steady because of Ukraine, but we don't know how that's going to end. And I don't see any, I don't think Putin, who, by the way, almost appears in this book toward the end, I don't think that they're going to let up. We'll see if the Western Alliance can hang together. I think you know what I suspect. Well, I will sign books for whoever needs them signed, and I thank you so much for coming in. I will never look out on a more literary, distinguished crowd. This is better than the National Book Award. John? Yeah.
Did anything ever happen with your last book and any kind of TV for the missed it?
Oh, yes, it was auctioned 3 times. I made more money on the auctions than I ever made on the book. And I got, I said wined and dined. It was more like watered. Everyone in Hollywood bottled water. And I went out and I had a great time and got put up in a nice hotel, and nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happens. I see some of my colleagues, like, Cadwell, say, oh my God, I've got this deal. Yeah, well, don't hold your breath. They love to option. By optioning it, it's nothing. The money they option with is just chicken feed to them. And it takes it off the market from someone else getting it. And they even auction, I had a student at Irvine who had his book called Carter Beats the Devil. It was a big bestseller about magic, about Houdini's rival was a guy named Carter, the great Carter. I should have worked on the name of him. And it was bought because the producers were making The Prestige. They didn't want another magic book to be made into a movie while they were working on their magic book. So there's all kinds of games, with options. Me, they tried to make it, but COVID, I think, sank everything. So maybe, and now there's a strike, so. Although I am talking to them, I'm not a union member, so they can talk to me about this. Sneaky devils. All right, I'm going to sit at that.